Claire had always thought of herself as organized, careful, someone who planned for almost everything. Yet tonight proved her wrong. Boston's spring had always been unpredictable. But she hadn't expected the sudden, violent storm that now rattled the windows of her modest apartment. She had been in the kitchen chopping vegetables for a simple dinner, just enough to keep the family content, when the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The refrigerator's hum vanished, leaving an eerie silence that made her heartbeat feel too loud. Instinctively, she moved toward the top cabinet, fumbling in the darkness for the candles she always kept for emergencies. Her fingers brushed against a glass jar of matches. And as she struck one, the flame wavered in the dimness before she set it into a small holder. The flickering candlelight cast long, wavering shadows across the walls, and for a moment, her kitchen transformed into a different place. The ordinary became mysterious. The mundane became intimate. From the living room, she heard the hesitant footsteps of her stepson, Ethan. "Mom." His voice carried just enough nervousness to make her heart flutter, not in a way that was inappropriate, but in that sharp awareness one feels when another human presence becomes suddenly significant. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, smiling despite herself. "Just a power outage. Are you okay?" "I'm okay," Ethan answered, stepping into the kitchen, holding a small flashlight that cut through the darkness. The soft beam revealed his attentive, caring eyes, the way he had grown tall and thoughtful over the past few years. He was no longer the small, shy boy she had first met when she married his father. Now at 17, he carried himself with a quiet maturity, his presence both grounding and gentle. Claire couldn't help noticing the tension in the air. It's an unspoken awareness that proximity brought. It wasn't anything improper. Rather, it was the awareness of another person's warmth, the sense of shared human connection that suddenly felt amplified by the darkness. As Ethan reached for a candle, their hands brushed lightly, and a tiny shock of awareness passed through Claire. She quickly drew her hand back, chuckling nervously. "Sorry," she said, though her voice carried a hint of excitement she barely understood. "It's okay," Ethan said softly, his lips curling into a small smile. "I didn't mean to startle you." They continued their slow movements around the kitchen, the candlelight casting golden glows across their faces, accentuating the contours, the slight signs of age and growth, the emotions hidden in subtle glances. Claire realized how much she appreciated these moments, small, fleeting, yet intense with the human desire for understanding and connection. Each movement of Ethan's hands, the careful way he placed the flashlight on the counter, the attention he gave to her instructions, it all made the room feel charged with an invisible energy. Thunder rolled outside, low and distant, then grew louder, shaking the windows with a sudden boom. Claire jumped slightly, and Ethan instinctively moved closer, placing his hand lightly on her shoulder in a gesture of comfort. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and the candlelight reflected in them, creating a shared intimacy that felt tender and fragile. They both knew it was a fleeting moment, a connection born of proximity, fear, and care, not romantic desire. Yet the human heart is complex, and she felt it stir. This strange mix of warmth and heightened awareness. The storm raged outside, rain slapping against the windows, wind rattling the balcony door. Inside the kitchen was calm, lit by the flickering candle and Ethan's small flashlight beam. They moved side by side, careful not to bump into one another, but aware of the closeness. Each step echoing the soft pulse of shared experience. Claire was conscious of her breathing. It's a slight quickening that came with heightened awareness of another person in her immediate space. She reminded herself to remain grounded, to see the moment for what it was. A simple, emotional connection intensified by circumstances. Nothing more. Suddenly, the candle wavered dangerously close to the edge of the counter. Claire leaned over to stabilize it, her hands shaking slightly. Ethan reached out instinctively, a protective gesture, his fingers brushing hers again. Neither moved away this time. The warmth of his hand on hers, the shared glance and the flickering candlelight, made her heart flutter in ways she had not anticipated. It was not a physical attraction, but an emotional one, a recognition of trust, care, and presence in a moment of vulnerability. The silence was broken only by the storm and the soft sound of their movements. Claire placed the candle in a safer spot, finally letting go of the trembling match holder, and Ethan stepped back as well. As though they had both just passed an invisible threshold. The tension of closeness remained, subtle and unspoken, but no words were exchanged. Both understood the delicate balance of human emotions, the thin line between connection and intimacy, and the necessity of respect and boundaries. Then, abruptly, the lights flickered back on, startling them both. The spell of the candlelight, the intimate darkness, dissolved instantly. Claire cleared her throat and smiled nervously. "Power's back," she said, almost laughing at how quickly the moment had ended. Ethan nodded, his cheeks faintly flushed, and set the flashlight down, feeling both relief and disappointment. The strange magic of the blackout had vanished, leaving only the normal hum of the refrigerator and the familiar scent of dinner cooking. They moved around the kitchen, finishing preparations for dinner. The closeness, the accidental touches, the shared glances, all of it felt charged, yet safely contained within the boundaries of family roles. Claire reflected on how these moments revealed the depth of human connection, the way a shared experience, fear or challenge, could make bonds feel stronger. She realized that she had underestimated the subtle ways relationships grow, how proximity, attentiveness, and shared vulnerability create emotional resonance that lingers long after the event. The storm outside continued, relentless, but the kitchen was a haven of warmth, light, and safety. Claire found herself stealing glances at Ethan, noting the way he handled himself, the way he instinctively reached out to offer help, and the thoughtful smile that appeared at unexpected moments. It was a complicated emotional recognition of growth and maturity, a blend of maternal care and human connection that was entirely appropriate but profoundly stirring. For Claire, the night had been more than just a blackout. It was a revelation of how much she had grown to appreciate her stepson, not in a romantic or inappropriate way, but in the awareness of his presence, his sensitivity, and the subtle emotional bonds that had developed over years. Each small gesture, each shared look, carried weight in a way that was almost intoxicating in its innocence and authenticity. As they finally finished dinner, carrying plates to the small table by the window, the storm began to subside. The wind died down, rain became a soft drizzle, and the world outside seemed calm again. Claire and Ethan sat across from each other, eating in silence, sharing only small smiles and brief conversation. Yet the memory of the candlelight, the blackout, and the closeness they had shared remained vivid in both their minds. A private emotional experience that neither would fully articulate, but both understood deeply. Claire cleaned up the kitchen after dinner, the normalcy of light and sound restored. She felt a quiet satisfaction in how she had navigated the evening, acknowledging the emotional tension, respecting boundaries, and appreciating the bond she shared with her stepson. She understood that human connection was multifaceted, could be comforting, intense, and deeply emotional without ever being inappropriate. By the time she turned off the lights and checked on Ethan in the living room, she realized that the storm had done more than disrupt electricity. It had highlighted the importance of trust, presence, and emotional awareness. She understood the delicate balance of family relationships, the subtle moments that build depth and intimacy of a safe, nurturing kind. And though the blackout had ended, the feelings it stirred, the awareness of closeness, the shared vulnerability, and the fleeting intensity of being truly seen would linger for some time, shaping how Claire viewed her stepson and her role as a caretaker in ways she had not anticipated. It was a lesson in human connection, emotional awareness, and the quiet magic that can exist in even the simplest moments. The morning after the storm brought calm, with sunlight streaming through the blinds and illuminating the quiet apartment. Claire tried to immerse herself in her usual routines, meals, chores, and tidying up the kitchen, but the memory of last night clung stubbornly. Every detail of the blackout, the candlelight, and Ethan's presence seemed alive in her mind, replaying like a quiet film. She reminded herself that it was nothing inappropriate. The intensity of the connection had been emotional, a natural human response to vulnerability and shared experience. Yet she couldn't deny the subtle thrill she felt. The way her heart had fluttered when their hands brushed. The way his gaze had held hers for a fleeting, electric moment. Ethan moved around the apartment with a certain careful energy that morning, quieter than usual, as though the blackout had left its mark on him too. He appeared in the kitchen while Claire brewed coffee, his steps light on the linoleum floor. "Morning," he said softly, avoiding eye contact at first. "Good morning," Claire replied, forcing cheerfulness into her voice, though she was acutely aware of his presence. She tried to focus on mundane things, setting out plates, pouring coffee, arranging fruit, but every glance at Ethan seemed to reveal something new. Way his hair caught the morning light, the subtle way his shoulders had broadened, the quiet confidence that had grown alongside him over the years. Ethan finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "About last night. The blackout, I mean," he said. There was hesitation in his tone, a hint of shyness mixed with curiosity. "It was kind of intense, wasn't it?" Claire smiled, realizing he was speaking not of fear, but of the emotional weight of the shared experience. "Yes," she said softly, choosing her words carefully. "It felt different, calmer, somehow. You notice things you don't during normal days." He nodded, a small smile forming. "Yeah, I guess I never thought a blackout could feel like that. Weird, right?" "It's not weird," Claire replied, feeling the warmth of her own conviction. "It just changes perspective. Makes you notice people and moments differently. Makes you feel more present." Ethan leaned against the counter, arms folded, and glanced toward her. The sunlight highlighted the earnestness in his face. Claire felt an odd mixture of pride and protective care, emotions that were entirely appropriate but unexpectedly strong. She realized that over the years she had grown deeply attuned to him, not in a romantic sense, but in an emotional, maternal, and human way. For the rest of the morning, their interaction carried a subtle tension, one of closeness and awareness rather than attraction. As they moved around the kitchen, arranging breakfast and chatting about school projects, Claire noticed how attentive Ethan had become, just to his surroundings, but to her. He asked thoughtful questions, offered gentle suggestions, and carried himself with a consideration that went beyond casual courtesy. It struck her how much he had grown, not just physically, but emotionally. He seemed more observant, sensitive, and aware of nuances in people's behavior. Claire realized that the blackout had highlighted not only her own emotional reactions, but also Ethan's emerging maturity. The shared moment of vulnerability had created an invisible bond, a deeper connection that neither of them could articulate, but both understood instinctively. Later that afternoon, Claire found herself alone in the kitchen again, chopping vegetables for dinner. Ethan had returned from school and was working on homework at the small table nearby. The quiet hum of the apartment was soothing, yet every so often their eyes would meet, and Claire would feel that same electric tension of awareness she had felt during the storm. She reminded herself constantly that her feelings were entirely maternal and emotional. The proximity, the small touches, and the shared glances were harmless but significant in their emotional intensity. It was a lesson in subtle human connection, how intimacy need not be physical or romantic to feel profound. Ethan looked up from his textbook, noticing the way Claire moved around the kitchen. "Want me to help with anything?" he asked, his voice carrying the same calm attentiveness from the storm night. "Sure," Claire replied, gesturing toward the vegetables. He stepped closer, taking the knife she offered, and began chopping with careful precision. Their hands brushed occasionally, lightly, each accidental touch lingering in the air just long enough to remind Claire of last night. The small gestures were enough to keep her heart aware, to remind her that human bonds could feel powerful even without words, as they worked side by side. The conversation turned to school, friends, and the upcoming weekend. Claire listened more than she spoke, noting the thoughtfulness in his answers and the subtle humor that emerged when he relaxed. The ordinary discussion became a quiet, emotional rehearsal of boundaries, care, and respect, how one could connect deeply without overstepping. Later, the afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting warm stripes across the kitchen. Claire and Ethan paused, exchanging a brief look, and in that quiet, unspoken moment, they acknowledged the bond between them. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't inappropriate. But it was profounder recognition of trust, understanding, and the comfort of shared presence. The emotional tension, far from being dangerous, had taught Claire something important, that human connection is often nuanced. You can feel an intensity of care, warmth, and attachment without violating boundaries. That night, as they cleared the kitchen together, Claire felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She realized that emotional intimacy, when handled responsibly, can be just as impactful as any other form of closeness. Even when Ethan eventually moved to the living room to work on his homework, Claire felt a subtle echo of the connection lingering in the kitchen. The space seemed quieter now, yet it carried the imprint of shared moments. The kind of memory that stays with you long after the event. That evening, when Ethan offered to help set the table for dinner, Claire noticed a small hesitation in his movements of self-awareness that mirrored her own. She guided him gently, praising his attentiveness and care. In those simple gestures, handing plates, arranging utensils, there was a quiet lesson about relationships, trust, and respect. It was a dance of emotional awareness. And both of them moved through it with sensitivity and grace. By the time dinner was ready, the apartment felt warm and full, not just with food, but with the silent acknowledgement of bonds that had strengthened in small, unseen ways. Claire reflected on how the storm had changed things, not by creating drama, but by offering a moment of vulnerability that allowed emotional connections to deepen after dinner. As they cleaned up together, Claire watched Ethan laugh at a small joke she made, and she felt the same protective, caring, and deeply emotional response she had felt during the blackout. She realized that life often presents moments of intensity unexpectedly, and it's how we respond, respectfully, thoughtfully, and with empathy, that defines the strength of human bonds. By the end of part 2, Claire understood that the previous night's experience had lasting effects. The blackout was no longer just a minor inconvenience. It had been a catalyst for emotional clarity. She recognized that her role as a stepmother was not just to provide guidance and care, but also to navigate emotional connections responsibly, understanding the depth of human attachment and the beauty of pure, non-romantic intimacy. Ethan, quietly completing his homework, seemed to feel the same lingering awareness of connection. The simple acts of being present, attentive, and caring had created a bond that transcended ordinary interactions. It was subtle, powerful, and entirely safe, perfectly aligned with the values Claire held for her family and household. As the evening drew to a close, Claire looked at her stepson and felt a profound sense of gratitude. The storm had tested them, not their boundaries, but their awareness, their empathy, and their capacity to care deeply without overstepping. It had shown her that emotional closeness could exist in its own right, a powerful, nurturing force that strengthened relationships. And as she switched off the kitchen lights, watched Ethan retreat to the living room with his homework, she felt a quiet, satisfying pride. She had navigated the intensity responsibly, learned from it, and deepened the emotional bond that made their family stronger. The blackout, in its suddenness, had revealed something timeless: human connection, when handled with care, can be one of the most beautiful, dramatic, and heartfelt experiences in life. The days after the blackout passed in a quiet rhythm, yet Claire found herself noticing things she hadn't before. The small apartment seemed alive with subtle details: the way sunlight hit the countertop in the mornings, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the delicate aroma of coffee brewing. But more than that, she noticed Ethan. He moved with a confidence that hadn't been there before, a careful attentiveness that seemed to echo the night of the storm. There was a weight to his presence now, not in arrogance or authority, but in quiet maturity, the kind that comes from moments of shared trust and responsibility. One afternoon, Claire was sorting laundry when Ethan entered the room. He had been doing schoolwork, but now seemed to want to connect, not with words alone, but with simple presence. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice calm, carrying a slight hesitation. "Of course," Claire replied, smiling. I just wanted to say after the blackout. I think I understand better how much you care, he said. He paused, unsure how to continue. Claire put down the laundry, meeting his eyes. There was no judgment, no hidden meaning, just an openness. The kind that comes with mutual respect and trust. It means a lot that you feel that way, she said softly. And I care about you, Ethan. Not in a romantic way, but in the way someone who loves you as family does. I'm glad you see that. Ethan nodded, a quiet relief washing over his face. Yeah, I think I do now. And I want to. Be someone who helps, who notices, who understands. The conversation shifted naturally, flowing into discussions about school, friends, and his plans for the weekend. The tension of proximity, of emotional intensity from the blackout night had not vanished entirely, but it had matured into a subtle awareness of connection and trust. Claire realized that relationships could grow in these quiet ways, with shared understanding and unspoken acknowledgement. The emotional weight was still there, but it was anchored firmly in family love, care, and mutual respect. Later that week, the power went out briefly again, though less dramatically than during the storm. Claire and Ethan were in the kitchen preparing a small snack. The lights flickered, then went out. Claire chuckled, remembering the previous incident, and struck a candle. This time, there was no tension, no electricity in the air. Instead, it was comfortable, familiar. A shared ritual that had become almost symbolic of their connection. Ethan set the flashlight down carefully on the counter and smiled. Ready for another blackout adventure? He joked lightly. Claire laughed, feeling the lightness of the moment. The way human connection can become strengthened not through drama, but through trust and shared experience. As they moved around the kitchen, handling plates and arranging snacks, Claire noticed how much she valued these small interactions. Each moment was imbued with subtle care, passing a plate, adjusting a candle, helping one another reach for items on high shelves. These ordinary gestures had become symbols of their bond, a bond built on attentiveness, emotional intelligence, and mutual respect. The weekend arrived, bringing with it a calm sense of routine. Claire had plans to visit the local bookstore, and Ethan, finishing his homework, decided to accompany her. Walking side by side down the city streets, Claire realized how much she had come to appreciate these shared experiences. Not romantic in nature, not inappropriate, but deeply meaningful. There was comfort in being present with someone who had grown to understand you. Someone who had shared moments of vulnerability and trust at the bookstore. They browsed quietly, occasionally exchanging thoughts about favorite authors and recent reads. The conversation was light, playful, yet carried an underlying current of mutual understanding. They laughed at the same jokes, noticed the same details, and moved together as though their shared experiences had created an invisible rhythm. Claire found herself marveling at how emotional bonds could strengthen through simple, respectful interactions. Later, as they returned home, the city lights flickered on in the evening, casting a warm glow over the streets. Claire and Ethan entered the apartment carrying their books and settling into the living room. Claire poured tea while Ethan settled into a chair with a novel. The quiet companionship was comforting. A reaffirmation of the trust and care that had been built between them that night. After dinner, Claire found herself reflecting on the past few days. The blackout, the storm, and the moments of closeness had taught her valuable lessons. She understood more clearly how relationships evolve not always through dramatic events, but through small gestures, attentiveness, and shared experiences. Emotional intimacy does not require inappropriate actions. It requires empathy, respect, and genuine care. Ethan approached the kitchen to help clean up the dishes, and Claire felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The closeness of the blackout night had transformed into a steady, enduring bond, one that would continue to grow in trust, understanding, and mutual respect. She recognized that her role as a stepmother was not merely to guide or supervise, but to nurture emotional awareness, helping her stepson navigate life while modeling kindness, empathy, and attentiveness. The next few weeks passed in a similar rhythm. Claire and Ethan found themselves navigating daily life with an unspoken understanding. Small gestures, helping with homework, preparing meals together. Sharing laughter over trivial matters had become expressions of care and attentiveness. The emotional tension of the blackout night had matured into a meaningful, safe connection that strengthened both of them. One evening, as Claire cleaned the living room while Ethan worked on a project, she realized how much she had grown through the experience. She understood the value of subtle emotional awareness, the power of being fully present, and the importance of maintaining clear, respectful boundaries. The shared moments of vulnerability had not created conflict or discomfort, but had reinforced the trust and love that existed within their family unit. Ethan, noticing her gaze, smiled and continued his work. There was no awkwardness, no hidden agenda, only the quiet assurance that their bond was both deep and appropriate. Claire marveled at how profoundly human connection could be experienced without crossing boundaries. How moments of trust and attention could leave lasting emotional impressions. Days turned into weeks, and life gradually returned to its normal rhythm. Claire continued to navigate her role with attentiveness, balancing care, emotional awareness, and everyday responsibilities. Ethan, growing more confident in his independence, still sought her guidance at times, and she provided it with patience and warmth. Their relationship had evolved, strengthened by the shared experience of the blackout, and the mutual respect and understanding that followed. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in hues of gold and pink, Claire reflected on how far they had come. The storm had been more than a disruption, had been a catalyst for emotional growth, for deepening understanding, and for the creation of a bond that was both meaningful and safe. She recognized that her stepson's presence in her life was a gift, and that the moments of shared attention, care, and awareness had enriched her own sense of empathy and emotional intelligence. Ethan approached her, asking for advice on a minor homework question. Claire guided him gently, enjoying the simple pleasure of sharing knowledge and witnessing his growth. In those moments, she felt the depth of their connection, not in an inappropriate or romantic sense, but as an affirmation of human intimacy, respect, and trust. It was emotional closeness at its finest. A bond forged through shared experience and careful attention. By the end of part 3, Claire understood that the blackout night had been a turning point. It had illuminated the depth of human connection, the subtle power of shared vulnerability, and the importance of emotional awareness. The bond she shared with Ethan was safe, nurturing, and profound. She realized that relationships do not always need grand gestures to be meaningful. Sometimes the quiet, everyday moments carry the greatest significance. As the apartment settled into nighttime calm, Claire and Ethan moved through their evening routines with ease. The connection between them remained a steady, reassuring presence that enriched their lives. The lessons of the storm, the blackout, and the moments of closeness would stay with them, guiding their interactions, strengthening their bond, and reinforcing the importance of empathy, attentiveness, and emotional maturity. Finally, as Claire turned off the kitchen lights and checked on Ethan one last time before heading to her own room, she felt a quiet pride. She had navigated the intensity of human emotion with care, respect, and thoughtfulness. The moments that had once been charged with heightened awareness were now memories of emotional growth, connection, and understanding. She knew that their relationship had been strengthened in ways that were both meaningful and appropriate, and that the lessons learned would continue to shape their interactions for years to come. The storm had passed. The blackout had ended. Yet the emotional resonance remained, quietly affirming the power of human connection, empathy, and trust. Claire smiled, knowing that these moments, small and fleeting as they were, had changed her life and Ethan's in ways that could never be undone.